Yeah, so let's answer the question ourselves. So, who are you? Where are you from? And what is a meaningful goal or intention or whatever word you would prefer to use?
So my name is Jordan Grummett. I live in Evanston, Illinois. You guys might know me as Doc G. I'm a blogger and a podcaster, and I wrote a book called Taking Stock, which basically is about me being a hospice doctor, because before I got interested in financial independence, I went to medical school, became a doctor, got really, really burned out, discovered financial independence, and decided to pare down my job as a doctor. In fact, he kept the only thing I really loved doing, which was hospice work, and only doing it 10 or 15 hours a week. But I started doing a podcast and a blog and thinking very deeply about financial independence and all those questions that I had in my blog and in my podcast about what a good life looks like and what should we do with money. I found that I couldn't necessarily find the answers in financial circles, but I did find some of the answers in my dying patients who were able to look at their lives in a brand new and different way once they found out that they were terminally ill. And it changed the way they thought about themselves. And it changed the way I think about the role money plays in our lives and things like purpose and what types of things we should strive for and what types of things we shouldn't. So that's what brought me here today.
Awesome. Yeah. And okay. So also, I want to hear, what is one meaningful goal or intention that you have?
So my main intention, so this is the theory, and I talk about it a little in the book, is this idea that time is finite and it's not commoditizable. In other words, we have a set amount of time and that time passes no matter what we do. So the only thing we kind of have some control over is what activities we participate in during that time. So my goal is to have as many enjoyable activities, purposeful activities in those time slots that I have left, because I can't change them. So that's my continuous goal, is always to have less things that I do that I loathe and more things that I do that I love, and try to fill as many time slots as possible with things that I love and not things that I loathe.
I love that. That's, I feel like I'm already taking notes of like, hey, I want to dig into this stuff. So I can introduce myself quickly and sort of kick off this live. So I am Jessica. I am a co-founder of the Pioneers. And I am actually currently in my camper van in Louisiana. And will be going to an event called FinCon in New Orleans this week. And my home base, though, is Boston, Massachusetts at this point. And the meaningful goal that I have, so one thing that I like to think, like I have a legacy statement. And my vision for the legacy that I will leave is that I abso-freaking-lutely love my life, and that I help others realize and realize that they also can live lives that they love, and to help them create that. And then to help create conditions in the world where more people have the opportunity to do that. So that I would feel like is like my overarching meaningful like legacy goal that I want to achieve. So yeah, um, I want to talk about a couple of housekeeping things before we jump in. So first is, the only people who are going to be on video during this chat will be me and Doc G. But if you have any questions or anything that you're like, hey, I also want to, respond to this, or I have an insight here, post that in the chat, have conversations with other people who are here. And we will do our best to get to as many questions as possible and bring up as many, insights and viewpoints as people are sharing. So definitely, please feel free to engage with us in the comments. And then the thing that I always do at these sessions is I am going to ask you, if you're here today, to commit to taking some sort of action coming out of this conversation today. And for those of you who've been here before, you've heard the reasoning. But the reason that I do this is because we pay attention differently if we're passively consuming something versus trying to figure out what's my key takeaway and what action will I take as a result of this. Right? We just get more out of those conversations. And so at the end of this conversation, I'm going to ask you in the chat to share with us what action do you want to take as a result of this conversation. And I'm starting to see some yeses in the chat. So I want to see a bunch more yeses and pinky promises and hell yes. That you will commit to taking some kind of action coming out of this conversation today. And I am going to also commit to taking some kind of action coming out of today because I am incredibly excited to have this conversation and to learn from you because there's a lot of things that I have been thinking about that I think relate to the content of your book and likely your next book and, a bunch of stuff that you're thinking about these days. Awesome. So I'm seeing some more yeses in the chat. So yes, I'm excited for you all to be here and for you to take something today and take action. So diving in, the first thing that I want to say is I am just so excited to be having this conversation today with you, Doc G, because I feel like you are just a really unique person to have the conversation with. Like, as you mentioned, as you're introducing yourself, like being in the position where your day job is to work with people who are in their last days of their life. Right. And you're having conversations with people about like, what does it actually mean to live a good life and to live in a way that we don't, end our life with a whole lot of regrets. And I think you've seen people too who, on both spectrums, right, who've had really rich, wonderful lives and they're sort of like happy through like the very end of it and surrounded with community. And then those who come to the end of their lives with regrets. And I think there's things that we can learn from both of those. And so, yeah, so thank you so much for being here for this conversation today.
Oh, thank you for having me. And, I would add this whole idea about taking some of the pressure off the finances and think about the quality and lifestyle design that you create for yourself was something that you've been talking about for a long time. And in fact, I talk about you in the book itself. And part of the reason is the notion of slow-fi and what that is. And this idea that, hey, maybe we can slow down and the money can be important, but we have to remember that the money is in service of something else. And that's kind of living the life we want to live. So I would thank you back in the sense that I think that, as content creators and people who think deeply about these things, we all kind of build off of each other and we all vibe on each other's ideas. And so I think some of the things you and Corey have created over the last bunch of years have really added to the conversation and helped build my theories, I think, as well as a lot of other people's.
Awesome. So I want to dive right in here. So the thing from taking stock that was the most impactful for me and stuck out, and it's something that I'm actually like, I think about pretty regularly, is this idea of a thing you call the climb. And I want to actually just read a quote from the book and then we can discuss it so that everyone like has that context. So in the book, you say humans feel most fulfilled and the closest to self-actualization, not when we buy a new toy or reap the rewards of an investment, but rather when we are doing purposeful things and aspiring to something of great personal meaning. I call it the climb, right? Right? I call it the climb, more specifically, striving toward our own unique purpose, identity, and connections. And for me, this was the core point of the book for me. I'm sure other people took many other things away from that. But I love this idea of the climb, and I would love to hear from you, like, why do you believe that human beings feel most fulfilled when we're on a climb?
So One of the philosophical underpinnings of the book is this idea that we tend to put money first. We make it a goal instead of a tool. And what I found from my dying patients is money wasn't the last thing on their mind. It was purpose. It was meaning. It was not having regrets and doing those important things in their lives. And so the idea behind taking stock was to start to reframe that conversation and say, yes, we need to be savvy about our finances. We need to build a model and a structure for financial independence. But that really comes secondary to this idea of knowing who we are and what's important to us. And even since the book, I've done a lot of thinking about what happiness is. And to me, happiness really is made up of two things. It's made up of meaning and purpose. So when you think about meaning, what you're really talking about is the way we cognitively think about our past. It's the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And a big part of happiness is seeing yourself as the hero of your past instead of the victim. So the stories you tell yourself, even when you've gone through very, very difficult things, is you actually give yourself grace and say, look at this horrible thing I came through, and look how I learned from it, and look at what a full person I am today because of that. So that's all about meaning. Meaning is about your past, and it's half of the equation of happiness. But the other half is purpose. Purpose is all about your present and your future, and it's all about action. And so to really understand purpose, I think we have to first figure out what's healthy and unhealthy about purpose. And then we need to create a framework for that action. And that's exactly what I think of as the climb. It is purpose in action. It's the framework to start building the life we want to live. So I think the two big questions then become is like, what does a healthy sense of purpose look like? And this is something I've really struggled with. And the reason why is when I started to talk about taking stock and I was out there marketing it and giving talks about it, I would have a significant number of people come up to me and say, you know, you tell me I need to find my purpose, and that causes me a great amount of anxiety. I've been searching for years. I don't know what my purpose is, and maybe I shouldn't need a purpose. And so I thought really deeply about this because I got enough people coming to me and asking me about it. So I went and did some research on purpose, and it turns out that the studies show that having a sense of purpose in life is associated with greater longevity, better health, and more happiness. On the other hand, at the same time, studies show that 90% or more of people get anxiety about purpose at some point. They term it purpose anxiety, and it actually makes them very distraught and can lead to depression. So we have a paradox, right? How can purpose be both the most important and healthy thing that leads to longevity and happiness, as well as give us major anxiety? And my conclusions about that is really that we generally think of purpose completely wrong. And this gets into the goal setting too. I think what we traditionally used to think of purpose are these big, audacious goals, these huge things. We want to be billionaires. We want to change the world. We want to cure cancer. But the problem with that kind of purpose is it often leads to anxiety. And the reason why is it's eminently failable. Like when you set these huge, big goals, a lot of times you don't necessarily succeed. And the reason why is not because you're a bad person or even that you didn't try hard. It's because for some of these huge goals, you have to be the right person at the right time, doing the right thing, and also happen to have some good genetics and probably a bunch of luck. And a lot of those things are out of our hands. So instead of feeling very abundant, all of a sudden purpose seems scarce because only a small percentage of people are going to really achieve those big things. So what I think is a much more healthy version of purpose is actually that focuses on process instead of product in the doing itself as opposed to the goal. So what if we started thinking about purpose as something we enjoyed doing that filled us up, that felt intentional and important, and that even if we went and did that thing and nothing came of it? I often talk about podcasting. I love podcasting. Podcasting is part of my purpose. I get excited the moment I sit in front of the mic. And by interviewing people, that hour or two I spend doing that is some of the best part of my day. Even if no one ever listens to that podcast, even if I get one download, it was still well worth my time. And so I really see purpose actually as something that's very abundant, that we have a lot of control over. We have a lot of agency in picking things that we enjoy doing, as opposed to that kind of big, audacious purpose, which we may or may not succeed, and it's very scarce. And so the climb is that type of purpose in action. This is the actual process of doing things that are important to you, of enjoying the process of doing them, And I think there is a little bit of incremental gain. So big audacious goals, for instance, for my podcast, I'd love to get 1 million downloads a month. But the truth of the matter is, no matter how hard I try, I can affect some of that a little bit. But, whether I do or not might be luck. Maybe someone really loves my podcast and they have a big following and they start to get their followers to listen. Some of those things I have control over, some of them I don't. But I can turn that around and say the incremental gain that's important to me is I want to be a better podcaster. I want to be a better interviewer. So that's something I can incrementally improve, and I have agency to improve that. I can go listen to good interviewers. I can listen to my recordings and take notes, and I can ask for people's opinion about what makes a good interview or not a good interview. So these are all things that could be part of my climb, and because they're process-oriented and because I have agency, they generally fill me up. They're a good use of that scarce time I was talking about. And they don't lead to anxiety. So my theory is that type of purpose, what I often call little p purpose, is what brings us the health and the longevity and, most important, community and connections. Because when you really do the studies, you find that it's community and connections to other people that really leads to all these good things. Whereas that big P purpose or that big audacious purpose often leads to anxiety and panic and makes us quit before we even start because the risk of failure is so high. And so that's what the climb is to me. It's the process of getting involved in things that fill your soul, that light you up, focusing on the process, and then finding little ways to improve and have incremental gain.
Awesome. So I feel like I want to talk through a couple of examples. And I actually want to get your advice.
Okay.
So at the beginning, I said okay, so I feel like I have this purpose statement or this legacy statement that I've created for myself that has 3 components to it. One is I want to abso-freaking-lutely love my life. And then there's a whole variety of actions to take that help me to do that and ways that continues to evolve, right? So I want abso-freaking-lutely love my life. I want to inspire others that they can also do that and make changes in their lives that will allow them to do that and that they deserve it, right? And then the third is how can I help create conditions in the world that more people can have that opportunity? And I actually would be curious to hear, does this feel like that fits into a healthy purpose? Or do you feel like that's a big, hairy, audacious goal that I actually am really curious about your perspective on that.
Yeah. So I think a lot of that depends on agency. So I want to break those 3 parts out, but a lot of it depends on agency. So if you said, I want to help 1 million people live happier lives, I think that's a big audacious goal and it's going to be a tall order. And the truth of the matter is you only have so much agency to really make other people live happy lives. On the other hand, if you turn that around and say, I want to be involved in activities that are meaningful, that I enjoy doing. And part of the reason I enjoy doing them is because they help improve people's lives and help them find more joy in their lives. I think that's little p purpose to the hilt. I think it's perfect. So to look at your 3 goals, you want to absolutely love your life. What you're really saying is, I want to be happy. And happy is a bad word because, right, happiness comes and goes. But what you're really saying is, I want some sort of self-actualization, some contentment. You want a high quality of life. So that, I think, goes back to meaning and purpose, right? So you're already working on that. Meaning, looking at your past and deriving some real meaning and telling the stories that feel good about your past so you can feel good about your present and future. So you're kind of already doing that, is my guess. And then it's starting on the climb with these purposeful activities. So if your goal, right, is to change people's lives, then you're going to start doing things which you like to do, which have that impact. So maybe that's having a blog. Maybe that's doing a mastermind. Maybe that's creating events like these events now. And as long as you're doing these kind of events and you're enjoying the process, like, I love this, I'm behind the mic, I'm getting all these people together, we're having these important conversations. If you can look at that and say, in the process of doing that, that's enough, regardless of whether I get 10 people who listen or 100 people who listen, right? If you can do that, then you're very much succeeding. And I think the legacy and the impact, and this is what people don't understand, and I get this all the time. They say, I really want to go after big P purpose, this big audacious purpose, because I want to have a major impact on people's lives. I want to change the world. And my argument is actually, because it's so hard to succeed at big P purpose, these big audacious goals, a lot of times we don't succeed. often your impact ends up not being as big as you think it will be. On the other hand, when you pursue little p purpose, when you are authentic and intentional in the things that you do, the people around you see you doing things you love, you create a community, and often you become teacher and student to those people, and those people become teacher and student to you, and you help each other and you impact each other's lives. And that continues. It doesn't just stop there, because those people then go out in the world and impact others' lives. A perfect example of this, and it's an example that's going to be in my new book, is when I was a little kid, I had a learning disability, and we moved from one place in middle school to another place in high school, and I had almost no friends, right? I was geeky. I just had trouble building a friend group, etc. But I loved baseball, and I loved baseball cards. And there was this antique store down the road, and this guy had been buying and selling antiques. And one day someone brought in an armoire, and he finished the armoire up, and he was going to resell it. And he opened one of the doors, and he found a stack of baseball cards. So he called the person he bought the armoire from and asked, hey, there are all these baseball cards. Do you want them? And the guy said, no, do whatever you want with them. And so he didn't know anything about baseball cards, and he decided to just, put them aside and not think about it. Well, one day a woman walks in with her, bratty teenagers tend to be. And the teenager sees the stack of baseball cards sitting on the display case, and he says, how much for the baseball cards? And the owner says, I don't know, $10. So kid takes out $10, goes here. And then, as teenagers tend to do, he took the cards, spread them out, and he said, this one's worth $10, that one's worth $20, this one's worth $5, and show the guy how basically, he got a great deal on these baseball cards. The guy who owned that store was enthralled. He was like, oh, this is amazing. And decided that he liked this, that he liked baseball cards. He used to play baseball when he was younger. He hurt his knee. He was never able to play in college or go on any further. And he hired the bratty teenager right there and then. And he started buying and selling baseball cards because he loved them. He didn't think he was going to make a huge profit or anything. He was amazed by this. This to him was little p purpose. He just loved it. Well, what happened is he created a community for lots of kids like me, kids who didn't have a community, kids who didn't have confidence, kids maybe who were kind of not doing well. And this group of kids became my community. And a lot of us left. This guy who owned the store became our mentor. And a lot of us left those few years when we were teenagers and went out in the world with a new sense of confidence. And so some of us, like me, became doctors. Other people became lawyers and accountants. We eventually got married, had our own kids. But the confidence that was instilled by that community for a lot of us outcasts probably changed our lives and probably changed the way we became parents. And we probably took our kids and went and bought them baseball cards and taught them about the joy of collecting. And if you can think about it, this one person following their sense of purpose didn't just affect him, it affected all us kids, and it probably affects our kids' kids. And this idea that we can pass on this joy and we can show to other people what it looks like to authentically and intentionally be doing things that light you up is like a rock that falls into the ocean and causes a ripple that just keeps going for miles and miles. And sometimes it gets bigger and sometimes it gets smaller. But that's what purpose does for us. It actually causes legacy. And I think people forget that by doing things like to bring it back to you, by having this intentional purpose that you have, when you concentrate on doing things you love and bring other people into your life and they become part of your community and you help one or two of them, that's like the beginning of that ripple. And years later, generations later, the effects still can be prominent. And that's what's kind of beautiful about this whole idea of pursuing purpose, as opposed to being anxiety provoking when we set these kind of goals that we think, oh, that's a great goal to set because it sounds amazing and outsized and wonderful. But a lot of times, actually, it takes us away from that happiness we're searching for.
Yeah. So that you said a lot of things there, and a couple that I want to dig in on. So one of them being just the fact that when we pursue our purpose, the impact that we can have on not only other people, but then the impact they can have on other people and on other, right? And that's that ripple effect that keeps going, even if it's something as small as starting to collect baseball cards,
Yeah.
right? Like pursuing with something that like makes you
Oh.
happy. And then one thing that you said a little bit ago that I felt like was really important was that it's it's doing something and it's enjoying the process of it
Mhm.
regardless of the outcome.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a really important piece, and something I actually try to focus on in my coaching programs and in my own life with people. Like when I thought about, what do I want to, I right when I first got into all of this personal finance stuff, it was 2018, and I was in a super toxic job. I had no
Mm.
idea who I was anymore. I was climbing the corporate ladder, trying to get the six-figure salary, um, and just in a really toxic spot, and really disconnected from myself and who I was, what my purpose was, what made me happy, right? All of those things. And at that time, I read Your Money or Your Life, and there was this question of like, what would you need to do if you didn't need to work for income?
Oh.
And that was a really like hard-hitting question for me, I would say, because when I first read it, I had absolutely no idea what the answer was
Mhm.
to it. And so I ended up almost using that as a guiding question as I sort of made my way through this process is what would and I guess that's like another way of saying, I guess it's like a different way of asking the question that you're asking is like, what would I do that I would enjoy the process
Mhm.
regardless of the outcome?
And people don't realize, again, it almost feels selfish, but it doesn't have to be. And let me give you another example, which I think drives home the same idea of what you've just said. I never met my maternal grandfather. He died of lung cancer in the 60s, and I was born in the 70s. My maternal grandfather loved math. He was a CPA, and he absolutely adored numbers and math. So much so that my mom remembers sitting on his lap looking at spreadsheets, right? Because he had spreadsheets for work, and he would sit her on his lap and he would be happy and he would be showing her the spreadsheets and what he was doing. Seeing my maternal grandfather love math, my mom did what all kids do. She tried on that identity to see if it fit her. So as she grew up, she started saying, well, do I love math? And the answer was emphatically yes. My mother also loved math. So what did she do? She eventually became a CPA herself. Then I come along. I had a learning disability and was having incredible trouble reading, but I was good at math. And I had the model of my mom who was good at math. And so I tried on that identity and I wore that identity very proudly. I'm good at math. My mom's good at math. Eventually, that gave me the confidence to overcome my learning disability. Eventually, my reading caught up with my ability in math. And I went into a very mathematical field. I became a doctor, something where math plays a big role in every day what you do. One day I was out there at the hospital seeing a patient who had been admitted over and over to the hospital. They were getting sick. We couldn't figure out why, and they were doing horribly. And I noticed a relationship between two lab values, a very mathematical relationship. And I recognized, because I loved math, that this was a rare disease defined by these abnormal numbers. And in fact, I eventually called a specialist and we looked at it all and we decided he did in fact have this disease, and we were able to give him medicine and he stopped being admitted to the hospital. And in a sense, this might have even saved his life. That guy was a pastor at a local church. And as a pastor in a local church, he often would take in runaways and people who were down on their luck. And so let's think about this. A guy who died in the 1960s, his love for math translated into my love for math, all modeled after seeing people do things that were very purposeful for them, which helped me recognize something that helped save someone's life, who then took a runaway in to help them in a time of their incredibly huge need. None of those people know my grandfather's name. My grandfather, who died 50, 75 years ago, has no idea the impact of his sense of purpose. Silly enough, he loved math. He didn't know the ripples that would come from that. And yet, I can see this direct connection, this direct correlation. And so, again, I think when we look at all this together, you realize that your impact on people can be very large. And a lot of times, all you have to really do, I think, to have that impact is to be authentic and intentional. And the way we do that best is we pursue things that light us up.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. So one thing that I want to do here, I actually want to get some participation from our audience. And so I actually want to hear from you. What are some examples of the climb in your own life? So what are some of the things that you love to do regardless of the outcome, right? You enjoy the process of these things and it doesn't matter, right, what that outcome is. So while we're waiting for people to answer that question, maybe I was hoping, Dr. G, we could talk about like what are some of these examples of the things that we love to do regardless of the outcome.
I mean, I've got tons of them.
Yeah.
And they don't have to be big and important. So podcasting is a huge climb for me. I love podcasting. I love getting in front of the mic and talking to people. Reading. I can sit and read for hours and hours. Exercise. Like I don't feel normal unless I'm walking. It doesn't have to be crazy exercise. I love to walk. Writing. Writing is probably one of the biggest climbs in my life. I love writing. I never gave myself permission to think of myself as a writer until I was able to extract myself from being a doctor, which was making me money and was fulfilling this view of what I thought was my purpose. But when I was able to eventually walk away from that and discover things that really did fill me up, writing became a huge climb for me. I think being a doctor was a climb at one point in my life. It just stopped being so. And that's another thing. You know, those climbs, they don't have to last forever. They only serve you as long as they feel good. But once you start dreading that activity, then it's not really feeling very purposeful anymore. So those are climbs for me, at least. I'm wondering what you'd say are some of the big ones for you. Clearly, helping people is a big climb for you.
Yeah. So when I'm thinking about this, so thinking of like the smaller things, so I think of like adventure and travel and like hiking and like this, and for me, it's this sense of like appreciating the beauty and having this sense of awe of, you know, everything that's around me. Also, I would say writing and speaking. I would say like for me, I think of it as like I'm a learner and a teacher. And so there's that learning process of like, I feel like the learning process isn't complete until I can turn around and share it with someone else. And that's something that I would do, like that that it doesn't matter what the outcome is, right? Like those are things that I want to do anyway. And I see a few coming in, and I want to get a few more, and then we'll call those out. But so one thing, so when I was starting the fine years, and when I was starting my coaching business, I felt like the question that I asked myself was this, like, what would I do if I didn't need to generate any income? And like, I want to do that. Like, that's how I feel like I've like formulated the business, right, that I run and the work that I do is what's the stuff that I would do regardless of regardless of whether I made any money doing it. Like my original plan for my coaching program was like, like I'm going to do this for fun on the side.
Yeah.
And like, maybe I can make a little bit of money, semi-retire at some point, right? And, you know, and make a little bit. And, you know, so for me, the whole focus was like, how do I do the things that I love to do and enjoy the process of doing? And then I can see what follows from that. But regardless of what the outcome is, it's still worth doing it. And I think that also removes a lot of the fear. too, right? Because they're right. I mean, there's obviously still the like ego piece of like, I really want this thing to succeed because we do generally as people want the things that we do to like be conventionally successful. But it sort of removes it to say, regardless of what happens, was this thing worth doing? Did
Yeah.
I learn will I learn something valuable from it? Will I enjoy the process? Um,
I
all those
love the
things.
term. I love to say that true, what I call little p purpose, or a good climb is goal agnostic, but not goal phobic. So it's goal agnostic,
Mm,
whether you succeed or not, or whether you get to whatever you consider the end point is not important, but it's not goal phobic. In other words, if you're doing something you love and you happen to make money for it, great. If that money you happen to make makes it possible that you can quit your 9 to 5 and do that full time, that's great. But if it
mhm,
doesn't, it still should be great.
mhm,
Otherwise, then it isn't what I would truly call a climb. And I think
mm,
that's kind of like one of those key things.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So, okay, I have another question for you, but I want to jump to the chat and hear some of the examples. And so, I see Jess saying painting and making art is something that she would do just because. And Jess, I know you do that. Um, Christina saying spending time in nature, learning something new. From Jen, reading, drinking good coffee, being in nature, board games with friends, and learning a new hands on skill. That's great. That's very specific. Um, I love that. Rebecca, long distance hiking, helping people achieve their philanthropy goals, helping people with their financial plans, supporting my friends, and Sunday burrito nights. I actually really love to see the like level of specificity of these things because I feel like it's so important to get like really
Yeah.
specific
And
with
it's also very
yeah.
abundant, right? Because
Mhm.
that's the truth is purpose can be very abundant. And so it can be just something as
Mhm.
straightforward as coffee with the people I love or burrito night or
Mhm.
that's I
Mhm.
mean there's
Yeah.
room for lots and lots of purpose. Which I
Mhm.
think is
Yeah.
wonderful. And what's also
Yeah.
wonderful is you see all of these is all of these are potential points to build relationships with other people. It's community and connections. Not all of
Mhm.
them have to. I
Yep.
mean, you might like going on a walk by yourself alone every morning, and that's totally fine. But you might eventually have a walking group, or you might eventually have a place where you
Mhm.
go to often and start knowing the regular people who are there. Or you might
Mhm.
find that these things that you love, when people see you doing them and how happy you are, they're going to approach you because we love happy people, like people who
Mhm.
look like they're really engaged in what they're
Mhm.
doing. We draw other people to us. Because then I'll say this, I've said this many times and I'll continue to say it, winning the game is not being financially independent. Winning the game is not even having a sense of purpose. Winning the game is actually the community and the connections. And that's what all comes from this. So I talk a lot about purpose, but the truth of the matter is purpose is only as important as I think as it really connects you to other people
Mm.
and builds a community around you. And I think
Mm.
that's where the real gold lies. I think that's what really gives you all those health
Mhm.
benefits and the longevity benefits. I
Yeah.
think purpose is just the best, easiest way there.
Got it. Yeah. So, okay. So I have all of these like nuggets from you, which is like the climb is purpose and action, but it's really the climb actually leads you to the relationships in the community, which is the sort of most important part of
It's
this
winning the game.
wellness and
Yeah.
longevity. Yeah. Yeah.
It's probably the thing that's most correlated with what we technically call happiness.
Yeah. So let me read a couple more. So we have Kim Lee saying scrapbooking, documenting her family's memories, demonstrating software to small groups, spending time in nature. Casey, learning to speak Spanish, horseback riding with friends, taking dogs on walks, being able to help a client understand a complicated medical situation.
Yeah.
WMIC going for a long walk every morning, and Rosie, long, deep conversations with friends and family. Um, so, okay, so I want to talk about a couple other examples because I actually feel like my view of the climb is shifting as we're having this conversation. And so I think I previously was feeling like, okay, so I guess an example of what I would consider a climb as like part of my life in the past was like I really wanted to become location independent and to be able to travel and experience the world and this beauty and awe and all of that we were talking about. And so for me, then it was okay, I got to problem solve and figure out how do I make that happen. Right. And so for me, how I decided that was likely to happen was, becoming an entrepreneur. And then we decided to build out our van and, all of those things sort of come together to get us to a place where like we had this goal and this vision. And I think it ties to I want to abso-freaking-lutely love my life, right? And so that was sort of what I felt like was my climb for like the last couple of years, to get and maybe it's that those were the action steps that I was taking to like make that climb a reality at that moment. Um, what do you think of that? Like, do you feel like that's connected to the climb or part of the climb or completely separate?
So here's the secret. The secret to the climb is showing up. Right? So you don't have to take actions too. The secret is showing up to do the thing that lights you up. Now, I think that's going to be made up sometimes of smaller actions. So maybe for you, the climb was travel, freedom, like to go out and interface with the world. So I think the building of these things maybe were even separate climbs that were supporting that important thing in your life. So building a business is not going out traveling and seeing the world or becoming an entrepreneur. But ultimately, you might have started to do that to help free yourself financially. And you might have enjoyed that more than, let's say, going to a 9-to-5. And so you're swapping out one thing which you maybe loathe or at least don't like as much for something you like a little bit more. And so you can build smaller climbs within those things. Like maybe for you, entrepreneurship was part of the climb or was a climb in itself. But ultimately, it's supporting some of these bigger wishes, dreams, purposeful things you want to do. But there are also some other ways around it, right? So your climb might have been travel, and travel might not have been possible for you at the time, but that wouldn't have stopped you from doing a travel blog or meeting in travel groups or exploring new places to travel. All would be very purposeful activities, which would be part of your climb that you could even do, even if it wasn't possible at the moment or you didn't have the financial means or what have you, to specifically do that thing right then. So what I'd almost say is you were trying to, you were doing a little bit about what we talk about in Taking Stock, deciding what's purpose for you. In this case, it might have been travel or interfacing with the world, and then building a financial framework that would support that. So I think the entrepreneurship and all those kind of things where you're saying, okay, I know this thing is important to me. It's a climb. It's something I want to work towards. How then do I build my finances around that so I can spend more time doing that purposeful thing?
Okay. Yeah. So the climb is the broader thing, it sounds like, based on what you're saying. And then the like specific tactical things to say, okay, I have this climb. This is what I want to experience. Then, right, there's sort of there's action steps or like smaller climbs kind of under this umbrella of the larger climb.
And so if we substitute, so climb is purpose and action. So just for the purposes of what we're talking about right now, if we kind of substitute the word purpose for climb, what we're really saying is we want to utilize our time as much as possible doing things that feel purposeful and as little time as possible doing things we don't like. And so the way we do that is we use the art of subtraction, getting rid of things we don't like, the joy of addition, putting things we do like in, and then when we can't add or subtract, we substitute, right? So maybe I don't like my job and I can substitute it for entrepreneurship. Maybe I like entrepreneurship a little bit more than I like my job, even though it's not exactly my climb, or maybe it is. Everyone's going to be different. But what you're really doing is you're, again, using lifestyle design to start filling up more of your time with purpose, with these climbs, and less of your time with things you don't like. So I think there's some intermediate steps. And I think what you're really talking about is
Mhm.
you have kind of these bigger dreams, and then to get there and to build that financial framework around it, sometimes you have to take some smaller steps. But I think the idea is the
Mhm.
same.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. And I like this framework, this like add, subtract, and substitute framework. So I'll say some of the people in the audience right now are people I've worked with as clients.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the activities that I have all of my clients do as part of my coaching program is they actually track their days
Yeah.
over the course of like a 4 to 5 week period of time, and they rank every activity on a scale of 1 to 5. How energizing was this thing? Like, did
Yeah.
it give me energy? Did I have more energy after I did it than when I started, or did it drain me, right? And engagement. So how focused was I on this thing? Was it easy to sort of stay in it and fully present in that situation, or was I constantly like, oh, I don't want to be doing this, I'm picking up my phone constantly, like I'm getting distracted? And those are two really good indicators of like, is this something that we're enjoying? And it feels similar to this, like, let's do
Yeah.
more of the things that we like and less of the things that we loathe.
What you're talking about right now is so valuable, that doing that exercise. I like to do it. So in my book, Taking Stock, I actually suggest almost doing the opposite. Let's say that you won the lottery and had more money than you ever need. And now let's go and look at your schedule, like pull out your calendar, your scheduler
Mm.
for the last few weeks. How many of those things would you have done if you had more money than you would ever need?
Mm.
And go start slatching things away. Like, I wouldn't do this, wouldn't do this, wouldn't do this. I'd keep this, circle that, wouldn't do this. I'd keep this.
Mm.
That's kind of eye-opening, right? Because then at least
Mhm.
you've removed the money as the thing and can at least say, boy,
Mhm.
this is
Yeah.
the stuff I like to do. This is the stuff I don't like to do. And that's kind of the fodder for working on that subtraction, addition, and substitution. You have to first, like you're saying,
Mhm.
become aware of, well, what do I like and what do I not like? And what's worth
Mhm.
salvaging? I mean, I had to do that with my career. I was being a doctor and I wasn't ready to leave that identity completely, but I knew it wasn't filling me anymore. And I literally had to subtract out everything I didn't like. I was left with hospice, but I found hospice, which I knew I liked, but realized I would do it even if I wasn't being paid for it. So that was like an automatic purpose, automatic climb, right? Easy. I knew
Mhm.
that that was something worth keeping. So even as I stepped away from this identity of being a physician, I knew there was part of it I wanted to keep. And
Mhm.
I think what you're talking
Yeah.
about doing is a very, very valuable exercise.
Yeah. I have found it and seen it to be a really valuable process and I think, like, exactly what you're saying, like, what I usually say is, like, what we wanna do is we wanna increase the average.
Yes.
Right? Like, if
Yes. Yeah.
we don't necessarily need to have every single thing in our day be like a 5 out of 5 for highly energizing and highly engaging, like, that might actually be a little bit exhausting. Right? But can we do more of the things that are 4s and 5s and get rid of can we, do the subtraction of the things that are draining our energy and that we really don't like and are not contributing at all to the life that we want to be living? And, could we increase that average from like a 2.5 to a 3.5? And that is going to make a huge difference in the way that we're walking through and experiencing life. Um,
The way I like to think about it is, if you pair the ideas of understanding purpose better with the ideas of financial independence, you hopefully will then at some point get to a time when you look at your schedule every day and everything on that schedule is something that you decided you wanted to be there. And that doesn't mean everything's great. Like, I love doing my podcast. Some days I spend editing my podcast, and those aren't the happiest moments, but I put it there. And you
mhm,
know what? If
mhm,
I decided I didn't want to edit that day, I could not do it. I could
mhm,
decide I didn't even want to put out an episode. I have that 100% control.
mhm,
Or I could put out an episode that just wasn't edited very good. I could say, you know what? It's not worth my time anymore. I'm just going to put out an unedited episode. But the point is, when I look
mhm,
at my schedule today, I have complete control over almost everything on my schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the things are deeply meaningful to me. And so, how do you get there? Well, first, I think you really have to understand what is meaningful to you and what purpose looks like. And then the second part is hopefully you can then build a financial framework around it. Does that mean that you have to be there from day one? No, this is our goal, right? But every time we add in something we like and subtract something we don't like, we've gained. And that's the whole point about getting from a 2.5 to a 3 or 3 to 3.5.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yep.
you are incrementally using your time more efficiently, effectively, and more joyfully, the more you can start doing that. And that's what's kind of really cool about the process.
Mm-hmm. And I think that that process, right, when you are incrementally making those changes, it like creates this virtuous cycle where you have more time and you have more brain space to focus on the things that you want. And so if and so I would say to anyone here, if you're in a spot where you're like, okay, I'm feeling like I am not at all yet focusing on like the things that I want to, could you choose just one area?
Exactly. And that's
Right?
why
Like, yeah, go
I was
ahead.
just going to say, and so that's why it's also really important to realize like it's easy to talk about this when you are financially independent, but these conversations are just as important when you are broke and struggling. And as hard as it is to say that, I think it really is true. Money is a tool, but it's one of many, many, many tools we have in our tool belt. And things like relationships and time and energy and youth and connections and community, they're other tools. And so when you find yourself bereft in your 20s doing a job you don't like with only enough money to pay the bills, even though you don't have that tool of money, you might have other tools like time and energy, right? Because when you're in 20s, you maybe don't have kids yet. Maybe you're more energetic than you are than like I am in my 50s when I get tired all the time. So you can use some of those tools to start building some of that margin and pursuing, even like you said, just a touch of purpose, a touch of something better using some of those other tools. And that's kind of, that begins the avalanche.
Yeah, exactly. And so, okay, so here's one question for you. If you were to give one piece of advice, like if people are like, what is like the one thing that they could start doing today? Is there like, what's one thing that you would recommend?
Right. So I think the easiest place to start is I think we have to start thinking about purpose before we think about our finances and everything else. I think it's put all that on hold for a brief moment. And so the easiest and fastest way to start thinking about purpose, I like the framework of the life review, right? So you can Google hospice life review, and it's that structured series of questions that you can actually give yourself. And it helps you take a look at your life and your past. What have you accomplished? What haven't you accomplished? What have been your big goals? What have you failed at? What have you succeeded at? What were those important relationships in your life? And so the big question that all this comes together, if you want like a 1-sentence life review, something to start with when you're trying to think about purpose is, if I found out that I was going to die next week or next month, what would I regret never having the energy, courage, or time to do? It's the 1-sentence life review, although I suggest you go and find a much more thorough one. And so start thinking about it. Regret in the dying is incredibly sad. Regret in the living is another name for purpose. So if you can think about what you regret or what in your past wasn't the way you wanted it to be or something you'd want to fix in your past, when you're dying, that's really hard because you have so little time. But when you're young, that's the base of your climb. Regret can be actually the beginning of your climb, which is a beautiful thing, because then we start realizing that regret is actually not a horribly negative thing. It is when you're dying. But when you're young and healthy, it's actually an amazing thing because it can point you in the direction of a climb. It can be an anchor. I like to talk about purpose. You don't find purpose, you create purpose. In other words, it's a very active, actionable thing. But I do think you look for these anchors in your life in which to build your climbs around. So regret, if you start thinking about things you regret, it's a beginning of an anchor, right? There are other ways to find some anchors of purpose too, but I think that's one of the most profound ones.
Yeah, that's powerful. Yeah, and I wrote down this again, a nugget of regret in the present is another name for purpose.
It is, or it should
Um,
be. I think if we're,
mhm.
if we're lucky, that's what it becomes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so what I want to do right now, actually, I want to turn to the audience, and I would actually like to hear from you if you are still here. What did you learn from this conversation? And what action or actions do you want to take as a result of this conversation? And so we'll give you a second to to post some things. And I think while you're thinking about it, I will also think about it of like, what is the thing that I'm taking away from this conversation? Um, there's so many nuggets. I think the idea of the climb being purpose in action, and like for me, I feel like my takeaway is expanding this idea of the climb to not necessarily be like, here's the specific thing I want to accomplish, but this is how I want it to feel, or what I want life to be like and feel like. And therefore, I'm taking these actions that I am going to enjoy regardless of the outcome of them. So it's like all of sort of that kind
Yeah, I
of
think I
process.
think we tend to look at purpose sometimes like it's a bucket list. And I don't
Mhm.
mind bucket lists, right? But
Yeah.
bucket list is like a one thing you either succeed and fail, and then once you do it, you're done. And I think the
Mhm.
climbs and purpose is actually much more about these more long-term things, right? So maybe
Yeah.
going to Machu Picchu is a bucket list item, but what maybe your purpose in your climb is more about, again,
Mhm.
interfacing with the
Yeah.
world or traveling or being opened up to new cultures or those kind of things.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and, I've been like, one thing that I've written about this in my newsletters and stuff recently is feeling like a little bit unsettled, in the sense that, right, I was feeling like I had this climb, right, that
Mhm.
of like wanting this to, and that right, and I was thinking of the climb as like, okay, I became location independent, but then feeling like, okay, achieved that climb,
Yeah.
what's next, kind of
Yeah.
thing. Whereas I think the way that I'm looking at it now is, right, the sort of small p purpose is this like connection with the world
Yeah.
around me, and this like sense of awe and adventure. And now it's simply like the question is different. It's not what's my next climb. It's like, what is the next way that I am going to pursue pursue this climb.
Yeah. And so the
Um,
questions become easier. The
yeah.
questions are, right, how do I open myself up to this thing that's important to me? Like, what are those actions or things I do? And then the other question is this still filling me up? Because at some point you may find it isn't anymore. And that's totally fine then to pivot to something else.
Right, right, exactly. That like, right. It's sort of like, like, for me, like, I still feel like the climb is the same. And so it's now, what's the new manifestation
Yeah. Yeah.
of the climb, versus like, I don't have to go find a completely new climb. It's about,
Yeah.
and so
And if
that
you,
actually feels less stressful.
yeah. And I would tell you, so how do you know when you're done with a climb? And if it becomes
Mhm.
stressful and anxiety provoking, and it's
Mhm.
probably not filling you anymore. If you're
Yeah,
too goal
yeah.
oriented, like it's like, oh, I'm not getting to
Uh-huh.
this place I want to go. Like I'm not getting the million
Mhm.
downloads on my
Yeah.
podcast. Maybe it's time to really reassess that climb. Maybe it's turned toxic.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And yeah, and looking back at my notes, this purpose anxiety, I think, was something that I was feeling,
Mm,
because I was like, oh, I'm sort of like done with this climb. Now I have to figure out what my next one
mm,
is.
mm.
Whereas like, no, I don't. Right? Like, it's more, I have the climb, and now I can decide and I get to explore and figure out what the next
Yeah.
manifestation
And
of
when
it
you take the stress off of it, I mean, most of us who were cognizant enough to get our finances order and cognizant enough to be thinking deeply about these things, we're not going to sit around and do nothing for our whole lives. Like things will,
Mhm.
whether you mean to or not, things will present themselves to you. And if you are open to them, you'll be like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Maybe I'll explore that. And sometimes you'll explore it and you'll be like, this is something I want to spend more time doing. And other times you explore and be like, well, that was fun, but I'm done.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm. Yeah.
I think, again, it really opening yourself up to abundance, right? As opposed to scarcity. I think goals can be very scarcity oriented, but purpose can be very abundant. There are a million things to get interested out there in the world. And when you realize that by doing those things you love, that feel good, that light you up, you probably actually will make a huge impact anyway on the world. It just frees you. It makes it easier.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I want to read out actually a couple of the things that people are taking away. And actually, I hope that you actually feel excited and like you've contributed to other people's purpose in this, and that there's a ripple effect that will keep going. So from Teresa is going to reassess small p purpose and look at clarifying processes versus goals. Brett learned that the climb is just as important as completing the goal. Kevin says he likes the concept of reviewing your schedule and seeing what adds and subtracts value, and going to add in activities that add energy. Jess says, I'm going to look for more ways to find purpose and help identify my climbs. From Rebecca, we hear dreaming smaller could potentially lead to a greater positive impact. Plant a seed that will someday give shade to people he may never meet.
Well said.
I love that.
Well said.
Yeah. And actually, that was a really awesome point to make too, is that like, we don't have any idea what the impact of our actions is going to be in the future. And it's likely to be different than what we expect.
And one last point on that. We are so attuned to generational trauma, but we rarely talk about generational growth. So generational trauma, we all know that we get handed these horrible things from past generations that suffered in ways, and then they bring us up in such a way to try to protect us from those things, and they end up reestablishing the trauma, right? When we're talking about money, we talk about money scripts, right? Those bad money scripts we get from our parents and grandparents. But the exact opposite is true too. Generational growth. And that was that example of my mother's father, right? Passing down the love of math, it's generational growth. And it gets back to this idea of impact and impacting people in ways, right? We have no idea they will, but we're passing down through the generation these climbs, this love, this purpose, this being intentional, and it's totally affecting the people around us.
I love that. Yeah. So a couple more from Casey. We hear purpose is doing what I love. I don't find purpose. I create it.
Yes.
And my action is to do the life review questions. Rosie, for me, little p versus big P purpose, tend to do things that are big and then it drains and exhausts. Yeah, that's a great thing, is like pay attention to how the thing makes you feel while you're doing it. Brett is going to finish your book and review the life goal questions.
Just in time for when I eventually get my next book out,
yes.
which will be a while.
Kinley, love the idea of taking stock of what fills my day and adding more of what's purposeful. WM, shifting my mindset from negative reflections and regret to thinking about positive reflections and forward purpose.
Which is very big. There's something called narrative therapy, actually. So for people, like a lot of people who feel very negatively about their past, the narrative therapist will help you go back and rewrite some of those stories and separate you from the trauma. Like, bad things happened to me, but that didn't mean I'm a bad person, which very much helps towards feeling good about your climb and your sense of purpose in the future when you've reconciled a little more of your past. When you feel the hero and not the victim, that's a big part.
Yeah. Okay. And then Jen says, as a person with anxiety, reframing of purpose, this reframing of purpose feels like a burden being lifted, which is awesome. And then Christina saying she wants to redo some of that energy and engagement tracking to see what else to add and subtract. So awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us today. So I know I would love, just Doc G, if you could share with us where people can find you and your work. We all know about your Taking Stock book. So for those of you who haven't read it yet, I would absolutely encourage you to go and pick that book up from Amazon or wherever it is that you can get your books, or request your library to get it, right? All of those good things. But yeah, Doc G, tell us, where can people find you? And perhaps, I believe you are writing a new book that touches on these
A
topics
lot of
too.
the things we've talked about
So
today are
yeah.
directly from there. So the easiest way to reach me is if you go to jordangrummett.com. That's JORDANGRUMET.com. That's like my main site, and will connect you to all the places I create content. So of course you can buy the book through there. But also I had a medical blog from like 2003 to about 2016 or so. There's a link for that there. There's a link to my financial blog, diversify.com. And then the place where I spend most of my time recently is the Earn and Invest podcast. That's also earnandinvest.com. But if you go to jordangrummett.com, you can find all of that. My new book will be published by Harriman House. We have a date possibly of January 2025. So when you make a contract, you write the book, you got to edit it, and then they take about a year to really get the marketing and everything down before the book drops. So it has been written, and it's called The Purpose Code, and it goes into all things purpose, including the difference between big P and little p purpose, and generational growth and legacy. And it's filled with stories, not only of the dying, but also the living. And its goal is to help us create more sense of this happiness through meaning and purpose.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here for this conversation. I am very excited for that book to come out, and I think we're going to have a lot more conversations about that over. Well, I'm going to see you at FinCon.
I was about to say, we're
going to
see each other in a few days.
We will have more conversations about that. And yeah, thank you so much for being here. And I think I can speak on behalf of everybody who joined this, that this was incredibly insightful. And so yeah, thank you very, very much.
Thank you for having me on and creating this amazing forum.
Awesome. Okay, well, we are going to wrap up now. So I will end the stream. Thank you all for coming.